Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is to talk about the sort of decision-making process of someone who they might feel is psychopathic or antisocial, whether this is a male or a female. Just sort of their rash decision making, where they just sort of make decisions out of the blue that just don't calculate, that don't add up, that seem sort of rash or what you might consider immature. So when we really look at or understand the maturity level, or what you might consider an immature behavior, I think that's a great way to describe it in someone who is psychopathic or antisocial. So antisocial meaning not very social or against being social. So for example, you might consider a lot of the people who are behind the algorithm of, say, for like some of the social media platforms, that those original founders might be antisocial, which means they might be very social people, but they are antisocial, which means they don't have the best interests of humanity or society at the core or the heart of things. So you can research that on your own if you want to understand, like, just sort of antisocial and how it belays the statement, of it's not that they're not social. They can be on the outside very social, very affable, have a lot of quote unquote connections or quote unquote relationships, or be surrounded by all sorts of people, but they can still be antisocial, or what Dr. Robert Hare describes as an intraspecies predator. And he did design a checklist to sort of show you some of the qualities. But when we look at sort of the immaturity, it seems like a very childish behavior, or someone of their age, this seems sort of age inappropriate for them. They might have grown, you might consider they might have grown out of this. They might matured out of this. They might have learned along their journey to be a little bit more mature, or what you might consider that seems very childish. It seems out of place. It seems age inappropriate. So things like we're saying, things that make you go, it might sort of caught your attention or snagged you emotionally, but you didn't really sort of pay any attention to it because you thought, well, maybe they were playful, maybe they were silly, maybe they were creative, or they can get away with this, or something of that nature, where you sort of explained it away or didn't pay attention. But when it becomes problematic is when it causes a deep fissure or a deep wound, or sort of a deep needling, where they're either doing something that is hurtful, saying something that is hurtful, just sort of like an emotional backlash, an emotional sort of slap across the face. You think you know what's up, well then take this. It's one of those sort of backhanded emotional hits, things that they might say, that they may do, that all of a sudden seem very unfounded or out of the blue, or how did you arrive at this? What led up to this? So there's a very much of a disconnect, not only with that person, but with yourself. So they seem sort of disconnected from their own foundation of what you know them to be, or it just seems very irrational, rash, or immature, and kind of like pipe down, or it just seems age inappropriate. So you have to understand that you might see this. There's a very limited emotional repertoire with a psychopath. The emotions that they display are very cerebral, which means they are very much calculated or arrived at and derived at in the mind. So not in the heart, not in the genuine sense, the authentic sense, the real sense. What you might consider, you're comparing to yourself and what you know as your playful side, your spontaneous side, maybe your inspired side, or your childhood passion side. Maybe, you might love to go fishing or make cookies or something that you feel like, nurtures your inner child. There's that to be said, but usually, people then keep it in checks and balances with their sort of grounded or rooted, or what Freud might call your super ego. It sort of balances the id. So the id, he always called your child and playful side. So the id, and then the super ego, which was that of your sort of conscience, your what you might have learned as the seat of your right or wrong, that sort of keeps it in check. So that's your super ego, just as a quick primer and understanding of the different parts of how you think and how you operate, your sense of morality, right or wrong, or your judgment. That's known as your conscious, behavior. In other words, that would be wrong to do that. I won't do that. That would be hurtful. That would be unlawful. That would be against norms. That would be too risky. That would be violating a boundary. That would be carrying it too far. So this is what we're talking about. But when we're talking about a immaturity, you might see them all of a sudden act very childish. Not that they're going to suck their thumb, but they might sort of literally take on what you might consider like a childhood tantrum, or what might be like childlike speak, where they seem very immature and they're lacking judgment or making very rash or strange out of the ordinary decisions. And if you understand, there is a physiological difference in the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the amount of cells, the amount of activity, the amount of neural connections that are taking place in the prefrontal cortex. So you have to understand that you have neurons which have axons and then synapses where they connect with each other. So, and then a neurochemical is secreted, and then you've got these connections, these thoughts, these decisions, these behaviors, these judgment, this rationale. You might call it executive thinking, and decision making. So the prefrontal cortex is that is the place within your mind, within your brain. It's the most newly developed or evolved aspect, which is really part of future planning, where you kind of build on your lessons that you've learned, and you refine yourself, you become smarter, you become more efficient, you become more mature. So, in other words, I can eyeball something and go, yeah, I know how to fix that, versus an amateur that doesn't know. Okay, so there's a buildup of learning, just like emotional learning. So there's a deficit of this in the sociopath, in the psychopath. Brain scans have showed this, studies have shown this, as well as formation differences in the amygdala, which is the fear center. There's a slowed and inactivity and a smaller size of this component of the brain, of the structure of the brain, which is smaller than usual. So if you've got a reduced structure, it's a reduced activity. So the prefrontal cortex is the decision making of judgment, which is morality, right or wrong. Okay, and then looking forward and sort of incorporated sort of the lessons that you've learned and having a vision for your future. In other words, yeah, let's do this with a relationship. Let's do this with a family. Let's do this with a business. I want to do this with my life. You have a decision-making and forward-looking ability there. So you have the ability, and so it makes sort of a congruency or a continuity. It makes sense. It's A and B and C and D, and so like a child might go, I want candy, and then they just sort of will throw themselves on the ground and then hit a temper tantrum, something that you might consider immature or foolish behavior. So this is really what you're seeing as what seems like childlike or immature behavior in a psychopath. That seems rash, that seems like poor judgment. That doesn't seem like a good thing to do. That's the area, the prefrontal cortex, which is the most evolved or newly evolved aspect of the brain, which has shown reduced activity in these individuals. So these people don't have that capacity for consciousness, that super ego. It is mimicked. It is put on display. It is as if. It's a seem as if. It's a deception. It's a foolery. It is a mockery and a mimicry of what they think people want to hear. It is not genuine. It is learned. So they have learned to be as if. So they have learned as if to be in a romantic relationship. So as I've said before, the psychopath will study, like early in their teenage years or early 20s or whenever it is that they sort of embark on this, and they go, wow, look at how this young couple he's sort of swooning her or she's swooning him. And they pick that up and they go, wow, I don't feel any of this, but this is what they do to get the girl or to get the guy. So, take them out, and go for a walk. Go for a walk on the beach. Sit on the bench. Put your arm around her shoulders. Hold her hand. Get her some hot chocolate. I mean, even though they wouldn't, get them a box of chocolates. So this is what they observe. And they go, well, I guess I must follow suit and then this works. And then they go hand the girl a box of chocolates or hand the guy, some sort of thing that makes him feel manly. And then his eyes light up or her eyes light up and they go, wow, well, that worked. And then it's a learned behavior, not a genuinely learned that they want for their repertoire that makes them the character that they are, but they will use this to mimic and to manipulate. And when you will see then this sort of immature side when things sort of go haywire, when they are acting out of that immaturity or what you might consider, this is where good judgment is called for. This is called for reason. This is called for learned maturity. This is called for some wisdom. So those sort of moments, and then you see things bottom out, you're like, wow, that is really off the charts. Like that person's going to get themselves into trouble and they don't seem to worry about it. It's like emotional belligerence. And you might even, a parallel to this might be if you see someone who is wildly drunk at a bar and they're just being very foolish. They're just, acting silly, but the alcohol might be responsible or something like that, or their peer pressure or things of that nature. So, but that in the psychopath, they sort of don't need that alcohol. They don't need the peer pressure. This is sort of what's going on with their normal. This is their daily. But they cover up and hide that aspect of their real self. So they put on that mask. And then when you see the mask drop, it's like you see the voltage of their mask deflate. You see like a voltage, like something changing in their energetic field and their etheric field and the energy that surrounds them. So you literally see like an alchemy. You can understand that thoughts are things and that there's an energy about people. So we have to go back to the real kinesthetic basis, which is that sort of etheric field which surrounds people, which you can feel and can become very palpable, which means you can almost touch or taste it. So if you've ever heard the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, or there was a chill in the air. So even though, you don't see a tension, you can feel a tension. And then the same thing is like this with an immaturity. Like, or you might say, there's an elephant in the room, or like you've heard that with alcoholics, there's an elephant in the room that they aren't talking about, and that is the alcoholism that they're trying to hide and conceal. They become expert at hiding and concealing, but then, when the spouse or the friend or the coworker, why do you have these little mini bottles in your pillow? Why do you have these little mini bottles in the sofa, in the attic, in the laundry room, wherever? So in other words, they become exposed. So it's a similar process of sort of exposing a psychopath when you kind of see these sort of bottom out, very immature behaviors that you go, man, anybody in their right mind of this age would have grown out of that years or decades ago, and they're still doing this, and they can't keep themselves in check. So, and then they feel a sort of entitlement, and then what's very strange is they never feel that they have done anything wrong. So because of this inactivity in the prefrontal cortex, they don't have that foundation of morality that goes, I am sorry, I was out of line, that was wrong. They don't have that feeling. It does not register. It does not cross their mind. It doesn't cross the window. It doesn't cross the street. It doesn't cross their front door or back door. It does not sail in the distance. It does not rise in the morning to greet them. They don't experience this. This is not an experience that they have. This is what makes them different. You're dealing with a different class, a different ilk, a different caliber of individual. You're dealing with something different. I just need to emphasize that to help you sort of get your clarity goggles on and your affirmation goggles of what, and validation goggles that you have internally of what is going on, because you need to really, 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 really get that. It's like having poles. If you've ever been skiing, you understand, you're going down on these very, very slippery, waxed, skinny things, and you're trying to navigate, and if you don't have poles to plant yourself, you don't have any leverage. You don't have any torque. You can't adjust the path. So it's very much like you're going down an emotional slope and you don't have any poles to sort of plant and navigate the emotions with. So it's very much like they don't have this. And so as you, being an individual who has experienced or been exposed, or as I say, come into proximity to this. So it's not really a relationship, because a relationship is a relating to and a connection thereof. So there is not this. It's a complete misfire off. So anyway, so the immaturity has a physiological basis that they don't grow out of. You can't school them on. You can't nail this down for them. You can't, you can't try to hammer this home for them. This is just how their composite is. This is how their emotional composite is. This is what they're dealing with. This is what you're dealing with. And so they, sound principled judgments, what you might consider ethical behavior. Like, this is the right thing to do. This is ethical. This is right. So that's a solid foundation, principled. So you cannot share a foundation with these individuals on that basis. There's an immaturity there. And then what's very strange, there's an inability to learn or to build. So, and this causes sort of what you might consider like a psychopathic forgetfulness. They just don't have a emotional register. We just had this talk. We just had this blow up. We just had this fight. So that's why we're not going to do this anymore. That's why we're not going to get together. That's why we're not living together. That's why we're not in business. That's why that's why that was happened. They'll just, so are we going to, you want to just get together? They act as if, well, is this still okay now that you know that, I'm doing all this? Is this still okay? It does not register when they sort of kind of, it's like they're testing the waters, or they just don't know better. And then there's sort of a continuity where you're like, really? After we just had this blow up, after we just had this discussion, after you just admitted it, there's just as if there's nothing wrong. And so with these individuals, they cannot learn because they truly don't feel that they have done anything wrong. So you can't have a closure and a kumbaya, come to Jesus, let's shake hands, let's at least have a closure, and stop the bleeding here, they don't, it does not connect. They don't, and so that's why they're doomed to repeat and repeat and repeat. So they will just sort of go through others, just sort of like a merry-go-round of relationships. It can just be from one to the next to the next, and it's as if, most people wouldn't have the capacity to say, well, it's just as if they got married to somebody, and then they got married to someone else the same day, and then broke up with someone else, and then got remarried. I mean, the decision making, it does not make sense. I mean, especially, and then a lot of people might say, well, wow, this person is just really driven. They just have so much energy. They're just this real, dynamic something. So a lot of people might then explain that away, or be fascinated, or think, wow, aren't they good? They're just so smooth. So a lot of people who see it on the surface don't really get it. They haven't seen what you have seen once you've sort of been with them long enough and have seen what goes on behind the curtains, behind the trap door, in the elevator, when the mask drops, and behind, when you're in the backyard or wherever it was, and you're like, wow, like this is not a sane person. And, you almost can't believe your eyes, but you have to trust your eyes. Believe your eyes. What you see is what you see. Trust that feeling, because you are on the right track. You are correct. What you have seen and felt, you have seen and felt. Do not discount it. Do not doubt it. Do not shrug it off. Do not write it off. It is, allow it to register. That happened. I mean, even if you thought this would never happen to me, this would never happen to anyone on my side of the street, this would never happen to my side of the globe, just forget all that. And remember that this is what you're witnessing. And so if you can testify or have a testimony to this, then just allow that to be a validation, and realize that there's a physiological basis in these individuals that is responsible for what you have seen and experienced. This is your buddy. Peace and harmony with you here today. I hope that the videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace out, peace in, peace be with you, and have a beautiful day. Stay on course. Stay the course of healing. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Give yourself some validation. I have got this. I understand now. I understand now. I see clearly now. It is okay that I think for myself now. I have got this. Based on what I have experienced, I know this to be the case, and so it is.